In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a peculiar horror that transcends the conventional brutality of war. It is not found in the clash of chainswords against alien chitin, nor in the thunder of orbital bombardments that crack planets like eggs. Instead, this horror resides in a quieter place, in the spaces between battles, in the long silences of stasis and sleep. It is the horror of consciousness trapped, of existence extended beyond all natural boundaries, of minds imprisoned within shells of metal that will outlast empires and stars alike. Imagine, if you will, a tomb world buried beneath layers of rock and time, its ancient mechanisms clicking through the millennia with patient, inhuman precision. Within its depths, millions of Necron warriors slumber in their stasis crypts, waiting for the moment when command protocols will surge through their systems and call them back to wakefulness. They have been sleeping for 60 million years, these lords of living metal, dreaming whatever dreams machine minds might conjure in the void between activation and oblivion. Now imagine that somewhere within this tomb, in a chamber that should contain only the ordered ranks of Necron sleepers, something else rests. Something that was not there when the tomb sealed itself away from the galaxy. Something that, like the Necrons themselves, is neither fully alive nor completely dead. A sarcophagus of ceramite and adamantium, its surface scarred by battles fought millennia after the Necrons entered their great sleep. Within it, suspended in amniotic fluid that tastes of machine oil and ancient suffering, a consciousness waits. A space marine, or what remains of one, sealed within a dreadnought, placed here by circumstances lost to time and the cruel indifference of the universe. What happens when the tomb awakens? When ancient protocols activate and Necron nobles rise from their slumber to find this foreign presence in their midst? When two beings, each trapped in metal shells, each bearing the weight of immortality they never truly desired, encounter each other across the gulf of incomprehension that separates their kinds. This is not a tale of immediate violence, though violence may come. This is not a story of simple enmity, though enmity certainly exists. This is something stranger, something that speaks to the deeper currents of horror that run through the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It is a story about the price of immortality, about the nature of consciousness imprisoned, about what remains when everything human or formerly human has been stripped away, leaving only the will to endure. The Necrons, lords of the tomb. To understand what occurs when a Necron encounters a dreadnought within its own tomb, we must first understand what the Necrons are, and perhaps more importantly, what they were. The story of the Necrons is not a tale of triumph, but of tragedy, a cautionary narrative about the terrible prices paid for survival and the cruel bargains struck in moments of desperation. 60 million years before the age of the Imperium, before humanity had even conceived of reaching beyond its birth world, a species called the Necrontyre dominated vast swaths of the galaxy. They were a proud people, builders of great dynasties and wielders of technologies that would seem like sorcery to lesser minds. But they were also a cursed people, born under a star that bathed their homeworld in lethal radiation. The Necrontyre lives were brutally short, their bodies ravaged by cancers and cellular degradation from the moment of birth. They built their cities in the shadows of vast necropoli, for the dead outnumbered the living by staggering margins, and death was the only constant in their existence. The Necrontyre hatred for mortality burned with the intensity of their poisonous sun. They looked upon other species, particularly the long-lived old ones, with envious rage. When diplomacy failed to extract the secrets of immortality from the old ones, the Necrontyre went to war. It was a war they could not win. The old ones commanded powers beyond Necrontyre comprehension, wielding the energies of the warp itself and traveling through a network of dimensional pathways that rendered conventional warfare meaningless. The Necrontyre were being slowly, methodically destroyed. Then came salvation, or what appeared to be salvation at the time. The Satan, beings of living energy that fed upon stars, emerged from the depths of space. These entities, ancient beyond measure and hungry beyond imagining, offered the Necrontyr what they had always desired: immortality. The process they proposed was called biotransference. The Necrontyr would shed their weak, cancer-ridden flesh and be reborn in bodies of living metal, necrodermis, capable of self-repair and immune to the ravages of time and disease. The Silent King, Sarek, ruler of all Necrontyr, saw this as the answer to his people's prayers. Despite the warnings of some advisors, despite the nagging doubts that whispered in the quiet moments between decisions, he ordered his entire species to undergo the transformation. Vast biofurnaces were constructed, and into these machines the Necrontyr marched, millions upon millions of them, from the lowest peasant to the highest noble. What emerged from those furnaces were no longer the Necrontyr. They were something else entirely. They were Necrons. The transformation was a betrayal of proportions that beg a description. As the Necrontyr bodies were consumed in the biofurnaces, as their consciousness was transferred into their new mechanical forms, the Satan fed. They gorged themselves on the spiritual energy, the life force, the very souls of an entire species. What the Necrontyr did not understand until it was far too late was that biotransference was not a gift, but a harvest. The Satan had tricked them into willingly offering themselves as sustenance. The Necrons that emerged were immortal, yes, but it was a hollow immortality. The vast majority of the population had been reduced to near mindless automatons, their personalities erased, their capacity for thought and feeling stripped away. They retained only the barest echoes of what they had been, programmed with absolute loyalty to their superiors and little else. Even those nobles who retained more of their cognitive abilities found themselves profoundly diminished. They could think, they could plan, they could remember, but something essential was missing: the capacity for true joy, for deep connection, for the ineffable qualities that make consciousness more than mere computation had been eaten by the Satan. Sarek, the Silent King, understood his error too late. He looked upon his transformed people and saw not salvation, but damnation. The Necrontyr were gone, replaced by the Necrons, immortal and powerful, but hollow, lacking that spark that had made them a living species. In the depths of his transformed consciousness, Sarek felt something that the Necrons were not supposed to feel: regret. Yet the transformation brought power. The Necrons, under the command of the Satan, turned the tide of the war in heaven. They fought with a ferocity and endurance that their organic forms could never have achieved. They conquered, they destroyed, they claimed worlds by the thousands. But as the war ground on, as the Old Ones unleashed their own creations, including the psychically potent Aeldari, into the fray, Sarek began to plan his revenge against the Satan who had betrayed his people. When the opportunity came, the Necrons turned on their masters. Using weapons designed specifically to target beings of pure energy, they shattered the Satan into thousands of shards, fragments of their former godlike power. These shards they imprisoned, turning their former masters into weapons and power sources. It was a victory of sorts, but it came at a terrible cost. The Necrons were free, but they were also damaged beyond repair, diminished beyond measure, and faced with a galaxy that had become unrecognizable. The Silent King made a final decision. Rather than face immediate extinction at the hands of the Aeldari and other emergent species, the Necrons would sleep. They would retreat into massive tomb complexes, built deep within the hearts of planets across the galaxy, and enter stasis. They would sleep for millions of years, waiting until the turbulent age passed and the galaxy became suitable for their return. The tomb worlds were marvels of engineering, using technologies and physical principles that have never been replicated by any other species. They employed interdimensional spaces to house millions of Necrons in areas that should not be able to contain even a fraction of that number. They were protected by systems designed to remain functional across epochs, tended by canoptech constructs that never needed rest or maintenance. Before entering his own slumber, Sarek did one final thing. He destroyed the command protocols that gave him absolute control over the Necron species. He freed his people, or what remained of them, from the chains of absolute obedience. Then he departed the galaxy, seeking some form of redemption, or perhaps simply fleeing from the magnitude of what he had done. For 60 million years, the Necrons slept. Empires rose and fell. Species evolved, flourished, and went extinct. The galaxy changed in ways both profound and subtle. The Eldari reached the pinnacle of their power, then fell into decadence and birthed a chaos god through their excesses. Humanity emerged from its homeworld, spread across the stars, fell into darkness during the Age of Strife, and then rose again under the Emperor's guidance. All of this happened while the Necrons dreamed their dreamless sleep in tombs scattered across the galaxy. The awakening, when it came, was neither sudden nor synchronized. A catastrophic flaw in the awakening systems meant that tomb worlds did not rouse as one, but in fits and starts, scattered across millennia. Some awoke during humanity's Great Crusade in the 30th millennium, others not until the closing years of the 41st millennium. Some tombs never awakened at all, their inhabitants lost to time, entropy, or cosmic disasters that destroyed their resting places entirely. Those Necrons who did awaken found a galaxy they barely recognized. The younger races, species that had not even existed when the Necrons entered their slumber, now dominated the stars. Worst of all, many tomb worlds had been colonized by these upstart species, who built their cities and hives directly atop Necron technology they neither understood nor respected. Imagine awakening after 60 million years to find your home occupied by beings you consider barely evolved from microbes, defiling your legacy with their presence. The Necrons who awake in the 41st millennium are not what they were even before biotransference. The long sleep has taken its toll. Many suffer from degraded personality matrices, their memories corrupted or lost entirely. Some awaken believing themselves still organic, only to confront the horror of their mechanical existence anew. Others embrace their transformation, seeing their mechanical bodies as superior to the weak flesh they once wore. Many have developed obsessions and eccentricities that border on madness, their ancient minds seeking any distraction from the existential horror of their eternal existence. Each dynasty, each individual noble who retains enough consciousness to have an opinion, approaches their undeath differently. Some seek to restore the Necron Empire to its former glory, reclaiming the galaxy as their rightful inheritance. Others have become collectors, like the infamous Trazyn the Infinite, who views the entire universe as a museum to be catalogued and preserved. Some dynasties focus on military expansion, others on scientific research, still others on simply defending their territory from intrusion. A few, recognizing the curse of biotransference for what it was, seek ways to reverse it, to somehow reclaim organic bodies and the capacity for true life. But all Necrons, regardless of their individual goals or the dynasty they serve, share certain commonalities. They are ancient beyond mortal comprehension, veterans of wars that shaped the galaxy itself. They wield technologies that seem like magic to younger races, manipulating matter at fundamental levels and bending the laws of physics to their will. They are incredibly difficult to permanently destroy. Their bodies composed of necrodermis that can repair damage at the molecular level, and even teleport damaged Necrons away from battles to be reconstituted later. And all of them, from the mightiest Pharaon to the mindless warrior, exist in a state somewhere between life and death. They are conscious, but not truly alive. They can think, but cannot truly feel. They are immortal, but not invulnerable. They remember being something more than they are now, and that memory, for those capable of holding it, is a source of endless torment. This is what the Necrons are, the survivors of a civilization that traded everything for immortality and discovered too late that they had gained the eternity they desired, but lost everything that made eternity worth having. They are ghosts in shells of living metal, ancient lords of a dead empire, awakening to reclaim a galaxy that has forgotten they ever existed. The Dreadnought, a prison of service. If the Necrons represent a species that chose mechanical immortality and found it wanting, then the Dreadnought represents the Imperium's own terrible solution to the problem of mortality among its greatest warriors. Where the Necrons transformed their entire civilization, the Imperium applies this curse selectively, reserving it only for those space marines deemed too valuable to allow death to claim them completely. The Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, are humanity's greatest warriors, genetically enhanced superhumans created through processes that border on the miraculous. Each Space Marine represents a massive investment of resources, time, and genetic material. They are walking weapons, soldiers who can fight and win battles that would require entire companies of normal humans. When one of these warriors falls in battle, their death represents a significant loss to their chapter, a diminishment of combat effectiveness that can take decades to replace. But sometimes a Space Marine does not die cleanly. Sometimes the injuries sustained in battle are so catastrophic that no amount of the Imperium's medical technology can restore the warrior to fighting form. The body is broken beyond repair, the limbs shattered, the organs ruptured, the spine severed. For a normal human, such injuries would be swiftly fatal. For a Space Marine, with their redundant organs and enhanced physiology, death comes slower, leaving a window of terrible opportunity. In these cases, when a Space Marine hero lies dying, but their brain and some of their vital organs remain intact, the chapter faces a choice. They can grant the warrior an honorable death, allowing him to pass into the embrace of the Emperor, his gene seed harvested for future generations. Or they can offer what is officially termed an honor, interment, within a Dreadnought. The process of interment is neither quick nor painless. The Space Marine's broken body is brought to the Apothecarian, where the chapter's medical experts and tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus work in concert. They assess what remains, determining which organs can be salvaged and which must be removed. Often, little more than the torso, head, and fragments of the original body remain useful. Everything else, limbs rendered useless by crushed bone, damaged organs that can no longer function, tissue too traumatized to heal. These are carefully excised. What remains of the Space Marine is placed within a sarcophagus, an armored cocoon equipped with the most sophisticated life support systems the Imperium can produce. This sarcophagus is then filled with amniotic fluid, a thick, cold liquid that sustains the remnants of the warrior's body and fills their lungs as they breathe. Neural interface cables are thrust into what remains of their nervous system, creating a direct link between their brain and the systems of the Dreadnought that will become their new body. The sarcophagus is then installed within the armored chassis of the Dreadnought itself, a walking weapons platform that stands twice the height of a man. The Dreadnought is equipped with weapons powerful enough to destroy armored vehicles, armor thick enough to withstand anti-tank munitions, and systems that translate the pilot's thoughts into movement and action. When the process is complete, the Space Marine no longer has legs, but can stride across the battlefield on mechanized limbs. They no longer have arms, but can wield assault cannons and power fists with devastating effectiveness. They no longer see with their eyes, but perceive the world through a web of sensors and optical feeds. The Space Marine has become something else. They are still conscious, still capable of thought and communication, still possessed of their memories and tactical knowledge. But they are also profoundly changed, transformed into something that exists in the liminal space between warrior and war machine. The psychological effects of this transformation are profound and largely unspoken in Imperial doctrine. which frames interment as an honor rather than the curse many dreadnoughts experience it to be. From the moment of awakening within the sarcophagus, the interred space marine confronts a reality that no amount of indoctrination or faith can fully prepare them for. They cannot feel their body, not in any meaningful sense. The sensations that reach them through the dreadnaught's senses are pale imitations of true touch, sight, and sound. They cannot smell, cannot taste, cannot feel the warmth of sunlight or the texture of cloth. All the small sensations that make existence tangible are gone, replaced by data streams and sensor readings. More horrifying still is the awareness that they can never leave the sarcophagus. The process is irreversible. Their body, what little remains of it, has atrophied to the point where removing them would be immediately fatal. They are sealed within their metal prison forever, destined to remain there until final destruction claims them. There will be no peaceful death, no burial among their battle brothers, no final rest. They will continue, awakened only for battle and return to cold sleep between engagements, for decades or centuries, or even millennia. The psychological weight of this existence is staggering. Many dreadnoughts, particularly in the years immediately following their interment, struggle with the isolation and sensory deprivation of their new existence. They are surrounded by battle brothers they can no longer truly touch, speaking through vocoder systems that render their voices mechanical and strange, experiencing the world at several removes from direct experience. The heroic narrative surrounding dreadnoughts, the notion that they are venerated ancients whose sacrifice is honored by all, provides some solace. But it cannot completely mask the horror of their situation. Between battles, when they are not needed, most dreadnoughts are placed into a form of stasis sleep. This is partly practical, as maintaining full consciousness for centuries would place tremendous strain on the life support systems. But it is also a mercy. The alternative sleeping between deployments spares dreadnoughts from the crushing boredom and isolation of existence in their metal shells. But this sleep is not restful. It is a void, a blank emptiness that may last years or decades between periods of wakefulness. When a dreadnought awakens, they may find that their chapter has changed, that the brothers they knew have aged or died, that decades have passed in what feels like moments. Over time, many dreadnoughts begin to experience a particular form of degradation. The organic portions of their brain, despite the best efforts of the life support systems, gradually deteriorate. Each death and reconstruction, each period of stasis, each passage of years takes its toll. Memories begin to fade, becoming vague and dreamlike. The emotional connections that once defined them as individuals weaken, becoming distant and abstract. Some dreadnoughts, particularly those who have served for centuries, begin to forget who they were before interment. They remember being a space marine, but cannot clearly recall the sensation of being flesh and blood. They know they once had brothers, but the faces and names blur together into an indistinct mass. This slow erosion of identity is perhaps the most insidious aspect of the dreadnaught's existence. They are not merely trapped in a metal shell. They are slowly ceasing to be themselves in any meaningful sense. What remains is increasingly just the warrior, the tactical knowledge, the combat instincts, stripped of the personality and humanity that once gave those skills context and meaning. They become, over the long centuries, something very much like the machines they inhabit, efficient, effective, and fundamentally empty. Different chapters and different dreadnoughts handle this transformation in various ways. Some embrace it, seeing the loss of their former selves as a form of purification, a shedding of weakness in service to the Emperor. Others fight against it, struggling to maintain their memories and identities against the inevitable erosion of time. Some develop obsessions or eccentricities, fixating on particular aspects of their past lives or taking unusual interest in specific aspects of chapter operations. Anything to maintain some sense of continuity and self. The chapters themselves treat their dreadnoughts with a complex mixture of reverence and practicality. The dreadnoughts are venerated as living ancestors, walking embodiments of the chapter's history and traditions. They are consulted for their wisdom, sought out for counsel on matters of strategy and chapter lore. Yet they are also weapons, tools to be deployed when situations require their particular capabilities. This dual nature, simultaneously revered elder and mobile artillery platform, creates a strange dynamic. The dreadnoughts are too valuable to risk frivolously, but too powerful not to deploy when true need arises. Some of the most ancient dreadnoughts have served for thousands of years, their memories stretching back to the Horus Heresy, or even earlier. These ancients have witnessed events that exist only as legends to their younger battle brothers. They fought alongside Primarchs, participated in the founding of their chapters, experienced events that shaped the Imperium into its current form. Yet even these ancients are shadows of what they were. The clarity of their memories is questionable, corrupted by the passage of millennia and the limitations of their increasingly degraded organic components. They may believe they remember the Primarch they served, but the memory is more impression than accurate recollection, a dream of a dream told through failing neural systems. The technology that creates and maintains dreadnoughts is ancient and imperfectly understood, even by the tech priests who oversee the interment process. The standard patterns of dreadnought date back to the Great Crusade or earlier, and like so much Imperial technology, they are maintained more through ritual and tradition than true understanding. Some chapters possess dreadnought chassis that are millennia old, their machine spirits awakening to receive new pilots when previous occupants finally succumb to damage that even their sarcophagi cannot protect against. When this happens, the old sarcophagus is removed, the chapter conducts funeral rites for the fallen ancient, and a new pilot is installed if circumstances and need demand it. The existence of the dreadnought represents one of the Imperium's many contradictions. It is simultaneously an honor and a curse, a gift of extended service and a sentence of imprisonment, a marvel of life-preserving technology and an instrument of slow, inevitable dehumanization. The Space Marines who become dreadnoughts are told they should be grateful for the opportunity to continue serving, that their sacrifice is recognized and honored. And perhaps, in the immediate aftermath of interment, when the alternative was ignoble death, they are grateful. But over time, as the years stretch into decades and the decades into centuries, as memories fade and connections weaken, and the organic components of their existence continue their slow march toward complete dissolution, that gratitude often transforms into something else. Not quite regret, for Space Marines are conditioned against such thoughts, but perhaps a kind of weary acceptance. They serve because that is what they were created to do, because their programming and indoctrination runs too deep to allow any other choice, because giving up would mean acknowledging that their transformation was not the honor they were told it was. And so they continue, these ancient warriors in their metal shells, awakening when their chapters need them, fighting battles across the Imperium, then returning to the cold sleep between deployments. They are venerated by their battle brothers, feared by their enemies, and pitied by anyone who truly understands the nature of their existence. They are living proof that in the Imperium of man, duty does not end with death. Sometimes it extends far beyond it, into an eternity of service that grinds away everything except the raw will to continue. The tomb world awakens. The awakening of a Necron tomb world is not a simple matter of throwing a switch and rousing millions of sleeping warriors. It is a process governed by protocols laid down millions of years ago, executed by systems that have been operational since before human civilization existed, and fraught with dangers both technical and strategic. Each awakening is unique, shaped by the condition of the tomb, the functionality of its systems, and the priorities of the nobles who first regain consciousness. The process typically begins with the tomb world's most basic systems coming online first. Deep within the planet's crust, where the main power cores of the tomb have slumbered for epochs. Ancient reactors begin their slow climb toward full operation. These reactors draw on principles of physics that humanity has barely theorized, manipulating matter at quantum levels to generate energy without fuel in any conventional sense. As power flows through long-dormant conduits, it reaches the central command nodes, massive computational systems that oversee the awakening process. The first Necrons to awaken are rarely the warriors or even the lower nobility. Instead, it is often the cryptechs, the technological masters of Necron society, who are brought online in the initial phases. These beings, more scientists and engineers than warriors, though they are deadly enough in combat, are awakened specifically to assess the tomb's condition and repair any critical systems that have failed during the long sleep. They emerge from their stasis crypts with their higher cognitive functions intact, carrying with them knowledge of technologies and sciences that would take human scholars lifetimes to begin to comprehend. The cryptechs conduct their assessments with mechanical precision, their consciousness operating at speeds far beyond organic cognition. They evaluate the condition of the tomb's defensive systems, check the integrity of the stasis fields maintaining the sleeping warriors, examine the status of the canoptech constructs that have maintained the tomb during its dormancy. Damage is inevitable. Entropy touches even Necron technology given enough time, and the cryptechs work to repair what they can before proceeding to the next phase of awakening. The canoptech constructs, the swarms of scarabs and larger spider-like machines that serve as the tomb's caretakers, have been active throughout the sleep period. These constructs possess a form of intelligence, though it is more akin to sophisticated programming than true consciousness. They have spent the millions of years of dormancy performing endless maintenance, repairing damage, rerouting power around failed systems, and in some cases, making modifications to the tomb's structure to adapt to geological changes in the planet itself. The awakening cryptechs review the work of these constructs, approving changes, correcting errors, and in some cases, discovering that the canoptech machines have had to make far more extensive modifications than ideal. Not all tomb worlds awaken cleanly. Some have suffered catastrophic damage during the long sleep, their systems corrupted by cosmic rays, their power cores depleted by unexpected energy drains, their stasis crypts compromised by tectonic activity or external intrusion. In these cases, the awakening process becomes triage. The cryptechs must determine which Necrons can be safely awakened and which have been damaged beyond immediate repair. They may discover that entire sections of the tomb are non-functional, their inhabitants lost to malfunction or the simple passage of time. The personality degradation that affects some awakening Necrons is a particular concern. The transfer of consciousness into mechanical form was never perfect, and the long sleep has exacerbated existing flaws. Some Necrons awaken with their cognitive functions intact, but find themselves subject to compulsions or behavioral aberrations they did not possess before. Others awaken with significant gaps in their memories, missing entire epochs of their existence, or unable to recall basic information about their former lives. The most severe cases awaken as little more than automatons, any trace of their original personality erased by system failures during stasis. Once the cryptechs have completed their initial assessment and made critical repairs, the awakening process continues with the tomb's nobility. The order of awakening within the nobility is strictly hierarchical, determined by ancient protocols that predate even biotransference. The Lord of the Tomb World awakens first among the nobles, assuming command of the awakening process and making strategic decisions about how to proceed. Beneath the Lord come the various ranks of lesser nobles, each awakening in their proper sequence, each assuming the responsibilities and authorities encoded into their programming. When a Necron noble awakens, their consciousness surging back through neural pathways that have been inactive for millions of years, they experience something that might generously be called disorientation. The transition from the void of stasis to full consciousness is not gradual. One moment, there is nothing. an absence so complete it cannot be called sleep or even unconsciousness. The next moment, there is awareness, sensation flooding through sensory systems, information pouring in from the tomb's networks. For beings who remember, however dimly, what it was like to possess organic bodies with their gradual transitions between states of consciousness, this abrupt return to awareness can be jarring. The awakening nobles immediately begin accessing the tomb's systems, reviewing data from the long sleep, assessing the current state of their domain. They discover how much time has passed, a revelation that can range from expected to shocking, depending on whether the tomb awakened according to schedule or suffered delays. They learn what portions of their forces are functional and what has been lost. They discover, often with something approaching rage, if they are still capable of such emotions, whether their tomb world has been colonized by younger species during their sleep. This discovery, that their sacred resting places have been defiled by the presence of organics who squat among Necron ruins like vermin in a palace, is a common source of immediate conflict. Many awakening tomb worlds find themselves occupied by imperial colonies, cities, or even entire hive worlds built directly atop Necron structures. From the Necron perspective, this is intolerable. These are their worlds, their territories, their rightful domains. The notion that some upstart species that barely existed when the Necrons entered their sleep would dare to claim Necron property as their own is offensive at a fundamental level. The awakening nobles must then make strategic decisions. Do they begin awakening their warrior legions immediately and purge the surface of organic life? Do they awaken more slowly, building their strength while attempting to remain hidden from the surface dwellers? Do they attempt to assess the current state of the galaxy before committing to a particular course of action? These decisions are influenced by the personality and priorities of the ruling nobles, the resources available to the tomb, and the immediate threats or opportunities present. The awakening of the warrior legions comes in phases. The standard Necron warriors, the lowest tier of the species hierarchy, are awakened in large numbers. These beings retain almost nothing of their original personalities, reduced to little more than programmable weapon platforms. They emerge from their stasis crypts and immediately assume their designated positions, their protocols activating and directing them to defensive positions or assembly points as needed. Above them, the Immortals, warriors granted slightly more sophisticated cognitive systems, awaken and take their places as the backbone of Necron military forces. As the tomb continues its awakening, more specialized units come online. The Deathmarks, the tomb's elite snipers and assassins, emerge from their dimensional exile, ready to mark targets for elimination. The Lich Guard, the personal guard of the nobles, awaken to take up their traditional protective duties. The various Canoptech constructs transition from their maintenance protocols to combat operations, ready to serve as needed in whatever capacity the tomb's defense requires. But the awakening is not merely a military operation. The tomb's cultural and societal systems also begin to come online. The nobles re-establish their courts, convening with their advisors and vassals to discuss strategy and priorities. Ancient rivalries that predate the Great Sleep may resurface, as nobles who disagreed before stasis discover that millions of years of sleep have done nothing to resolve their differences. The dynastic politics that defined Necron society reassert themselves, for better or worse, shaping how the tomb world will interact with the galaxy it finds itself in. The initial awakening period is a vulnerable time for any tomb world. Systems are not yet fully operational, the warrior legions are not fully assembled, and the tomb is relatively exposed to external threats. If enemies discover the awakening process underway, they may attempt to destroy the tomb before it can bring its full power to bear. The Necrons are aware of this vulnerability, and their awakening protocols are designed to minimize exposure during these critical early phases. It is during this awakening process, when systems are coming online and nobles are assessing their domains, that anomalies are most likely to be detected. The tomb's sensors, sweeping through its chambers and cataloguing its contents, might discover something that should not be there. Perhaps it is a breach in the tomb's integrity, an intrusion from the surface or from below. Perhaps it is evidence of intruders during the sleep period, artifacts or remains left by those who penetrated the tomb's defenses and met their deaths in its corridors. Perhaps it is something more unusual, something that triggers alerts because it does not match any known template in the tomb's ancient databases. Perhaps it is a sarcophagus of ceramite and adamantium, bearing the eagle insignia of the Imperium of man, its power systems in low power mode, its machine spirit dormant but not dead, resting in a chamber that should contain only Necrons and their constructs. A Dreadnought somehow ended up here, in the depths of a Necron tomb, sleeping its own dreamless sleep, while all around it, the ancient masters of the tomb begin to stir. The discovery. When metal meets metal, the first indication that something is wrong comes not from the high nobles of the tomb, or even from the awakening warriors. It comes from a canoptek scarab, a small construct roughly the size of a Terran beetle, one of thousands that patrol the tomb's endless corridors on their programmed maintenance rounds. This particular scarab has been following its assigned route for millions of years, checking for structural damage, repairing minor wear, cataloguing every centimeter of its designated section. Its simple AI has long since mapped every detail of its territory, creating a perfect internal model against which it compares each patrol. Today, or rather, on this particular patrol that represents the Scarab's first full sweep after the tomb's awakening protocols initiated, something in that internal model does not match reality. In Chamber 17 Delta 9, subsection 47, there is an object that was not there during the last patrol. This discrepancy triggers a response in the Scarab's programming. It extends its sensory apparatus, scanning the anomalous object with instruments that analyze everything from thermal signatures to molecular composition. The object is large, roughly 4 meters tall and 2 meters wide, composed of ceramite and adamantium alloys that the Scarab's database does not recognize as Necron in origin. It is clearly a constructed object, not a natural formation or a piece of debris from geological activity. Its power signature is minimal but present, suggesting systems in a low-activity state rather than complete shutdown. Most peculiar of all, the Scarab's scans detect organic matter within the object, preserved in some form of stasis or life support system. Living tissue, neural activity, biochemical processes, all operating at minimal levels but definitely present. The Scarab's programming does not include sophisticated decision-making capabilities. It knows only that it has discovered an anomaly requiring attention. It broadcasts a priority alert through the tomb's communication network, tagging the alert with its location, sensor readings, and a classification code that roughly translates to unknown object of potentially significant concern. Then it continues its patrol, its duty fulfilled, moving on to scan the next section of corridor while elsewhere in the tomb. More complex intelligences process its report. The alert reaches the tomb's awakening cryptex first. These technological masters, already engaged in the massive task of coordinating the tomb's revival, allocate a portion of their consciousness to analyze the Scarab's findings. They review the sensor data with mechanical precision, their minds processing information at speeds that would leave organic thinkers dizzy. The data presents a puzzle. The object is clearly technological, showing design sophistication that suggests a relatively advanced civilization. But it is not Necron technology, which rules out the possibility that it is some lost artifact from before the Great Sleep. The presence of organic matter is particularly intriguing. The younger species that have emerged during the Necrons' absence are almost uniformly organic, and the Necrons have learned, in their limited interactions with these species, that they tend to construct various types of containment systems for their own kind. Medical pods, stasis chambers, cryogenic storage systems. Could this be something similar? A preservation system of some kind, holding one of the organics in suspended animation. One of the cryptechs, designated Zendrak the Technographer, decides to investigate personally. Zendrak has served this dynasty for millions of years, first as a living Necron-tier scientist, then as a Necron cryptech. His specialty is technological analysis, the art of understanding unfamiliar systems and reverse engineering their principles. The anomalous object represents exactly the kind of puzzle that engages what remains of Zendrak's curiosity, one of the few emotions that has survived mostly intact through biotransference and the long sleep. Zendrak moves through the tomb's corridors with the smooth, precise gait characteristic of Necrons. His body, unlike the standard warrior forms, is heavily modified for his role. Additional limbs sprout from his torso, each tipped with various analytical instruments. His ocular sensors glow with sickly green light as he processes data from multiple sources simultaneously. He reaches Chamber 17 Delta 9 in moments, time being somewhat flexible for a being who can shift his perception between normal speed and accelerated processing states at will. The object sits in the center of the chamber, looking distinctly out of place among the black stone walls and geometric precision of Necron architecture. It is obviously a sarcophagus of some kind, its external structure decorated with Gothic imagery and inscriptions in a language that Zendrak's translation matrices struggle to pass. Imperial Gothic, his systems eventually determine, a language used by the human species that now dominates large portions of the galaxy. The sarcophagus shows signs of damage, scorch marks and impact craters suggesting it has seen combat, but its structural integrity appears sound. Zendrak extends his sensory apparatus, running detailed scans of the object. His instruments penetrate the outer shell, mapping the internal systems. The technology is crude by Necron standards, relying on comparatively primitive power generation and life support systems. But it is functional, maintaining the organic matter within in a state of minimal activity. The scans reveal more details about the occupant. Male, heavily modified from baseline human physiology, possessing multiple redundant organs and enhanced musculature consistent with what Zendrak's databases identify as space marine augmentation. The body is severely damaged, missing limbs, supported entirely by the sarcophagus's life support systems. Most intriguingly, the brain remains active. Minimal activity, but definitely present. Whatever consciousness resides within this machine is not fully dormant. It exists in some twilight state, aware but not conscious, present but not engaged. Zendrak finds this fascinating. The humans have created a system to preserve one of their warriors past the point where natural death should have claimed him. They have sealed him in this shell, keeping his organic components alive through artificial means, much as the Necrons themselves are preserved through mechanical bodies. The irony is not lost on Zendrak, though his capacity to truly appreciate irony has been somewhat diminished by biotransference. Here, in a Necron tomb, rests a human warrior who exists in a state remarkably analogous to the Necrons themselves. Both are beings whose consciousness has been preserved in mechanical forms. Both exist in a state between life and death. Both are warriors who should have died, but have been granted a cursed form of continued existence. But how did this object, this Dreadnought as Zendrak's databases now identify it, come to be here? The tomb has been sealed for millions of years. The human species, according to Necron historical records, only achieved interstellar travel relatively recently. The technology evident in the Dreadnought's construction is consistent with contemporary Imperial manufacturing. This thing has not been here for millions of years. It arrived sometime after the tomb sealed itself, which raises a host of questions. Zendrak reviews the tomb's security logs, searching for any indication of when and how the intrusion occurred. The logs, maintained automatically by the tomb's systems, show no breach. At least, no breach that was detected and recorded. But the presence of the Dreadnought proves that somehow, at some point, the tomb's integrity was compromised. Perhaps there was a period when the defensive systems were offline, a gap in coverage during some malfunction or repair cycle. Perhaps the intrusion came through a route that the sensors did not cover, some fissure or tunnel that connected the tomb to the surface. Perhaps it was deliberate placement, though who would have the means and knowledge to penetrate a Necron tomb and leave something behind? Zendrak sends a report to the tomb's awakening nobility, summarizing his findings and raising the questions that now demand attention. The response comes swiftly. Lord Thasar, the tomb's overlord, is intrigued and disturbed in equal measure. Intrigued by the puzzle of how this object arrived and what its presence might reveal about the tomb's security. Disturbed by the implication that the tomb's defenses were breached at some point, suggesting vulnerabilities that may still exist. Lord Thasar issues orders. The Dreadnought is to be moved to a more secure location for detailed analysis. A contingent of Lichguard is dispatched to guard it, for although the occupant appears dormant, it is still potentially dangerous. Cryptechs are to conduct exhaustive examinations of the object, determining its capabilities, its purpose, and most importantly, whether its presence represents a threat to the tomb. And the tomb's security systems are to be reviewed in their entirety, searching for any weakness that might have allowed this intrusion. As the Necron warriors carefully extract the Dreadnought from the chamber, using gravitational manipulation to lift its considerable mass, Lord Thasar contemplates the implications. His dynasty has awakened to find the galaxy changed, filled with younger races that barely comprehend the Necrons' former glory. The Imperium of Man, in particular, has proven to be both numerous and tenacious, their forces encountered on multiple worlds as the dynasty begins reasserting its territorial claims. This Dreadnought represents a microcosm of that larger conflict, a human warrior, preserved past natural death through technological means, resting in a Necron tomb. Is it a harbinger, a message, an accident of fate? Thasar does not have enough information to determine the truth, but he suspects that whatever the answer, it will not be simple. Nothing involving the younger races ever is, and so the Dreadnought is moved deeper into the tomb, into chambers where the awakening Necrons can study it at their leisure, surrounded by instruments and sensors that analyze every aspect of its construction and function. The Necrons do not yet know the name of the Space Marine sealed within, what chapter he served, what battles he fought before ending up here. These details, if they exist anywhere accessible, will require time and effort to extract. But they will extract them eventually. The Necrons have patience born of millions of years, and curiosity undimmed by their transformation into mechanical beings. What they do not yet understand is that the Dreadnought's occupant, while seemingly dormant, is not entirely unaware of his surroundings. At some level too deep for conscious thought, the Space Marine's mind registers changes in his environment. The movement of the sarcophagus activates sensors that feed information to his sleeping consciousness. Somewhere in the depths of programmed warrior instincts, alerts begin to trigger. Something is wrong. Something has changed. And though full wakefulness is still distant, prevented by the low-power state of his systems, the stirrings of consciousness begin their slow climb toward awareness. Through Necron eyes, understanding the Ancient One. Lord. Thasar stands before the Dreadnought in the analysis chamber, his mechanical body motionless as he processes the information flowing into his consciousness from a dozen different cryptechs who have spent the equivalent of several solar rotations examining this curiosity. His ocular sensors glow brighter than usual, a sign that he is running multiple simultaneous thought processes, trying to understand not just what this object is, but what it represents. The initial analysis confirmed what the first scan suggested. The Dreadnought is a walking weapon platform, designed to house a critically injured warrior and allow them to continue fighting despite injuries that should have been fatal. The technology is primitive compared to Necron engineering, where Necron bodies can repair themselves at the molecular level, reconstructing from near complete destruction. The Dreadnought relies on brute force protection, thick armor plating and redundant systems to survive damage. Where Necron consciousness can be downloaded and uploaded between different bodies when necessary, the Dreadnought's pilot is permanently sealed within their sarcophagus, unable to be separated from it without immediate death. Yet Thasar finds himself fascinated rather than dismissive. There is something in the fundamental concept of the Dreadnought that resonates with his own existence in ways he does not fully understand, and suspects he never will. The Necrons stripped away their flesh to become living metal. This human warrior has had his flesh stripped away not by choice, but by necessity, reduced to little more than a torso and head kept alive by machines. The Necrons exist as consciousnesses programmed into mechanical forms. This human exists as an organic brain wired into a weapons platform. The parallel is not exact, but it is close enough to be unsettling. Cryptek Zendrak approaches, his multiple limbs carrying data slates covered in readouts and analysis. His voice, when he speaks, carries the characteristic flatness of Necron communication, emotion reduced to statistical probabilities and tonal variations that approximate feeling without truly experiencing it. My lord, we have completed the structural analysis. The containment system is surprisingly robust for human engineering. The organic components within are maintained in a stable state, though we detect signs of degradation consistent with extended stasis. The neural interfaces are crude but functional. We have also successfully translated the inscriptions on the exterior. Thasar gestures for Zendrak to continue. The cryptek projects a holographic display, showing the Gothic script rendered into symbols that Thasar's ancient mind can pass. The warrior's name is recorded as Brother Ancient Theron of the Crimson Scythes, chapter. The sarcophagus bears honors dating back approximately 1,300 years by current imperial reckoning. This is not a recent construction. The warrior has been entombed within this device for over a millennium, awakened periodically for battle, then returned to stasis. His recorded service dates show deployment in over 200 separate engagements spanning 7 centuries of active service. 7 centuries. Thasar processes this information. For a human, even one enhanced to the levels of a space marine, that is an enormous span of time. Multiple generations of baseline humans would be born, live, and die in that period. Yet this Brother Ancient Theron has persisted through it all, awakened only when needed, sleeping the rest. The thought triggers something in Thasar's programmed consciousness, a reaction that in a biological being might be called melancholy or recognition. He has been serving for 7 centuries, Thasar says, his voice carrying harmonics that Zendrak interprets as contemplation. Never truly living, never allowed to die, awakened only to fight. Does this not sound familiar, Cryptek? Zendrak's optical sensors dim briefly, a gesture that might indicate acknowledgement or perhaps discomfort, if such emotions could still be meaningfully experienced by the Necrons. The parallel is notable, my lord, though I must point out the significant differences. Brother Ancient Theron chose to serve his Imperium. The human doctrine we have analyzed frames Dreadnought interment as an honor, a chance to continue fighting for their emperor. Our transformation was different. Was it? Thasar's question hangs in the air between them. We were told that biotransference would grant us immortality and power. We were told it was the solution to our suffering, the key to finally matching the old ones. The Silent King himself ordered us to undergo the process. How much choice did any of us truly have? And this human warrior, broken and dying, his body shattered beyond repair, do you think he was given a true choice? Die honorably or be sealed in this metal coffin forever? What choice is that? Zendrak does not answer immediately. The question touches on philosophical territory that the Necrons generally avoid. It is easier to focus on conquest, on reclaiming their empire, on the practical matters of warfare and survival, than to contemplate the deeper implications of their existence. But the presence of this human dreadnought makes such contemplation unavoidable. The humans believe they are honoring their fallen, Zendrak finally says. They revere these dreadnoughts as living ancestors, sources of wisdom and history. From what we can determine from Imperial records, dreadnought pilots are consulted on matters of strategy and doctrine. They are not merely weapons but repositories of their chapters' traditions. And are we not the same? Thazar asks. The younger Necrons, those awakened in recent cycles, do they not look to those of us who remember the time before biotransference for guidance? Do they not treat us as repositories of tradition and history? The function is identical, Zendrak. Only the timescales differ. Another cryptek, Ahmontek the Remembrancer, joins their discussion. Ahmontek specializes in cultural analysis and historical preservation, roles that have made him one of the few Necrons who actively contemplates the philosophical dimensions of their existence. His voice carries different harmonics than the others, suggesting a personality template that retained more capacity for abstract thought than is typical. There is another parallel worth considering, my lord. We have analyzed the Dreadnaught's awakening protocols. When Brother Ancient Theron is roused from stasis, his systems engage in a specific boot sequence. Life support activates first, ensuring the organic components are properly sustained. Then sensory feeds come online, allowing him to perceive his surroundings. Neural interfaces synchronize, connecting his consciousness to the Dreadnaught's weapons and locomotion systems. Finally, higher cognitive functions engage, and he becomes fully aware and capable of independent action. The entire process takes approximately 6.3 seconds. Thazar sees where this is going. Our own awakening follows similar patterns. Precisely, my lord. When we emerge from stasis, our systems activate in sequence. Power cores engage, sensory inputs begin functioning, motor control comes online, and finally full consciousness returns. The mechanics are different, but the process is fundamentally similar. Both we and this human warrior exist in states of minimal consciousness between deployments, awakened only when needed, experiencing existence as a series of discrete instances, rather than a continuous flow. This observation triggers a cascade of thoughts in Thazar's mind. He has been awake for cycles now, attending to the business of securing the tomb world and preparing for operations beyond its boundaries. But he remembers the awakening, the abrupt transition from nothingness to awareness. He remembers previous awakenings, scattered across the millennia, each one bringing with it a moment of disorientation as his consciousness tried to adjust to the passage of time. Years, decades, sometimes centuries had passed while he slept, and each time he had to reorient himself to a galaxy that had changed in his absence. Is this what Brother Ancient Theron experiences? That same jarring discontinuity, awakening to find that time has passed, that the world has moved on without him, that he must now adjust to new circumstances before being thrust into battle. The thought generates something in Thazar's consciousness, a reaction that his degraded emotional processes interpret as a form of sympathy or recognition. Can we communicate with him? Thazar asks suddenly. If we were to activate his systems, could we speak with this human warrior? The crypteks exchange the subtle electromagnetic pulses that serve as their equivalent of glances. Zendrak responds cautiously. Theoretically, yes. We have mapped his communication systems. They operate on frequencies we can replicate. However, doing so carries risks. Awakening him fully might trigger hostile responses. He would find himself in an unfamiliar environment, surrounded by what his indoctrination would identify as Xenos enemies. His training and programming would likely compel him to attempt violence. What if we maintained his systems at a low activity state? Ahmontek suggests. Not full awakening, but enough for minimal consciousness and communication. Similar to how we sometimes consult with Necrons still in the process of awakening, when their systems have not fully initialized. They can communicate, but they lack the capacity for aggressive action. Thazar considers this. It is dangerous, potentially foolish even. The human warrior represents a potential threat, and the sensible course would be to simply deactivate the Dreadnought permanently, or use it as a source of information about Imperial military capabilities. But Thazar finds himself unwilling to take that path. This being, This brother ancient Theron is not simply an enemy to be destroyed. He is something else, something that reflects aspects of the Necrons' own cursed existence back at them. Initiate minimal awakening protocols, Thazar orders. Maintain his motor functions offline. We will attempt communication. I wish to understand what this being thinks, how he experiences his existence. Perhaps in understanding him, we may better understand ourselves. The cryptechs move to implement the orders, their multiple limbs manipulating instruments and interfacing directly with the Dreadnought systems. They work carefully, not wanting to trigger defensive responses or cause damage to the already fragile organic components. Power flow to the sarcophagus increases gradually. Life support systems ramp up from their minimal baseline to more active levels. Sensors feed data to the sleeping mind within. Neural interfaces, dormant for however long the Dreadnought has been in this tomb, begin carrying signals again. Deep within the sarcophagus, suspended in amniotic fluid that fills lungs that no longer breathe in any conventional sense, a consciousness begins its slow climb toward awareness. Brother Ancient Theron, who has slept the dreamless sleep between battles for longer than he can accurately remember, feels the familiar stirrings of awakening. His mind, operating on instincts developed over centuries of this exact process, begins running through diagnostic routines even before full consciousness returns. Systems check, life support, nominal, sensory feeds, coming online, motor control, offline. That's wrong. Motor control should be available. Why can't he move? Full awareness crashes over him like a wave. He tries to move, to operate the Dreadnought's limbs, to ready his weapons. Nothing responds. He is awake, conscious, aware, but paralyzed within his own body. The sensory feeds show him his surroundings, and what he sees makes no sense. He is not in the Crimson Scythe's fortress monastery. He is not in any Imperial location he recognizes. The architecture around him is alien, wrong, all sharp angles and non-Euclidean geometries that seem to hurt to look at. And standing before him, visible through his optical feeds, are beings that his centuries of experience immediately identify. Necrons. He is in the presence of Xenos, the ancient machine race that the Imperium wages endless war against. Enemy territory. Surrounded. Helpless. Panic. An emotion that Brother Ancient Theron thought he had conquered centuries ago floods through his consciousness. He tries again to move, to ready weapons, to do anything. But his motor control remains offline, his weapon systems unresponsive. He can only watch as one of the Necrons, one whose form bears the signs of noble rank, approaches and addresses him. The Necron's voice, when it speaks, bypasses his audio receptors entirely, transmitted directly into his neural interface. The words form in his mind, grammatically correct Imperial Gothic, delivered with a mechanical precision that makes it sound alien despite the familiar language. Brother Ancient Theron of the Crimson Scythes, I am Lord Thazar of the dynasty of the Endless Vigil. Do not attempt violence. Your motor systems have been disabled for our mutual safety. We mean you no immediate harm. I wish only to speak with you. Theron forces himself to calm, calling on centuries of discipline and experience. He cannot fight. He cannot flee. All that remains is to gather information and await opportunity. When he speaks, his own voice transmitted through his vocalizer systems, it carries the weight of his age and the suspicion born of countless battles. I am a prisoner then, a trophy for Xenos to gloat over. Know that my chapter will come for me, Necron. They will reduce your tomb to dust and scatter your mechanical corpses across the void. Perhaps, Thazar replies, and there is something in the mechanical voice that might be amusement or might be sadness. Theron cannot tell. But I think not any time soon. You have been in our tomb for some time, Brother Ancient. Your chapter has not come. Perhaps they believe you destroyed. Perhaps they do not know where to look. Or perhaps, and I suspect this is most likely, they have no idea you are here at all. This information strikes Theron like a physical blow. How long has he been here? The last thing he remembers clearly is… what? A battle. There was a battle. Greenskins, an enormous horde of them, overwhelming numbers. His battle brothers fighting and dying around him. He remembers damage, catastrophic damage, systems failing, consciousness fading. And then, nothing. How did he end up here? How long? Theron asks, and he hates that his voice carries a note of what might be fear. How long have I been in this place? We do not know, Thasar admits. Our tomb has been sealed for millions of your years. We awakened recently, and you were discovered during our initial surveys. You were not here when we entered our sleep. You arrived sometime during our dormancy, through means we have not yet determined. But based on the dust accumulation and minor decay in your external systems, I estimate you have been here for at least several of your centuries, possibly longer. Centuries? Theron processes this, his enhanced mind working through the implications. He was lost, presumed destroyed, left behind in the depths of a Necron tomb, while the galaxy moved on without him. His chapter might have long since given him up for dead, his name inscribed in their rolls of honor among the fallen. The brothers he fought beside are likely dead themselves by now, replaced by new generations of Crimson Scythes, who would know him only as legend if they remembered him at all. The isolation of his existence, always present but manageable when he believed he would be awakened for battle and return to his chapter, suddenly becomes almost unbearable. He is alone here, truly alone, surrounded by Xenos in a tomb light years from any Imperial world. Even if rescue were possible, no one knows to look for him. Why have you awakened me? Theron asks, trying to focus on the immediate situation rather than the existential horror of his circumstances. What do you want from me? Thasar is silent for a long moment before responding, and when he does, his words surprise Theron entirely. I want to understand you, brother ancient Theron. I want to understand how you bear the weight of your existence. You are a being trapped between life and death, sealed in a mechanical shell, awakened only for violence, and returned to darkness between battles. You have served thus for 7 centuries, denied both the peace of death and the fullness of life. I wish to know how you endure this, because in truth, I see much of my own existence reflected in yours, and I do not know how to endure it either. The admission, coming from a Necron lord, stuns Theron into momentary silence. He has fought the Necrons before, engaged their forces in battle, destroyed their warriors, and witnessed their terrible weapons in action. But never has he considered them as beings capable of existential struggle, creatures that might question their own existence. They were enemies, Xenos to be destroyed, machines to be shattered. The notion that this Necron lord might be seeking something like understanding, that he might see parallels between his cursed existence and Theron's own imprisonment in the Dreadnought, is almost incomprehensible. And yet, looking at Lord Thasar through his optical sensors, Theron cannot deny the parallel. The Necron stands before him, a consciousness trapped in a mechanical body, separated from its original form by millions of years, and a transformation that stole something essential from it. They are both ghosts in shells of metal, both denied the natural end that should have claimed them, both existing in a twilight state that is neither life nor death. I endure, Theron finally says, his voice quiet, because I serve the Emperor, because my duty is not complete, because my chapter needs whatever strength I can still provide. I endure because the alternative, surrendering to despair, would dishonor the sacrifices of those who fell so that I might continue. That is how I bear it, through faith, through duty, through the certainty that my suffering has purpose. Thasar listens, processing these words. Faith, duty, purpose. The human warrior clings to these concepts, uses them to give meaning to his cursed existence. The Necrons once had similar concepts. The dynasties provided identity and purpose. The silent protocols granted structure and meaning to their endless campaigns. But after millions of years, after the slow grinding away of personality and memory, do these things still carry the same weight? And when your faith falters, Thasar asks, when you awaken and find that decades have passed, that the brothers you knew are dead, that the galaxy has changed in ways you cannot recognize, when the certainty fades and you are left with only the cold awareness of your mechanical existence, how do you endure then? Theron has no immediate answer, because Thasar has touched on the truth that Theron rarely allows himself to acknowledge. His faith does falter. Between battles, in the moments before his systems cycle down into stasis, he sometimes feels the crushing weight of his existence. He sometimes wishes that the damage that necessitated his internment had simply killed him, granted him the peace of the Emperor's embrace, rather than this half-life of endless battle. He sometimes wonders if the honor of Dreadnought service is really an honor at all, or if it is a curse dressed up in ceremonial language to make it bearable. I don't know, Theron finally admits, and the honesty of the statement surprises him. I don't know if I truly endure, or if I simply continue because stopping is not an option available to me. My programming compels me to serve. My training does not include the option of surrender, so I continue, awakening after awakening, battle after battle, telling myself that this is honor, that this is duty, that this is what I was created for. Whether that constitutes true endurance or merely persistence, I cannot say. The chamber falls silent, two ancient warriors regarding each other across the gulf of species and allegiance, finding in each other an unexpected mirror of their own cursed existence. The cryptechs watch, recording the exchange, analyzing the emotional harmonics in both voices, trying to understand the significance of what they are witnessing. Eventually, Thasar speaks again. You are the enemy, brother ancient Theron. By all protocols and strategic considerations, I should simply deactivate your systems and study your technology for whatever advantages it might provide. But I find I am reluctant to do so. You are a living testament to the fact that our curse of mechanical immortality is not unique. That the younger races have found their own ways to trap consciousness in metal shells and call it honor. Perhaps there is value in allowing you to continue existing, if only as a reminder that we Necrons are not alone in our particular form of damnation. What are you proposing? Theron asks, suspicion warring with desperate hope in his voice. I do not know yet, Thasar admits, but I believe that destroying you would be wasteful. You are unique, a curiosity worthy of preservation. Trazin the Infinite would certainly think so, though I have no intention of allowing him to claim you for his galleries. No, I think you will remain here for now, in our tomb, neither prisoner nor ally, but something in between. Perhaps we will find uses for you. Perhaps we will simply study you. Perhaps eventually, we will find a way to return you to your Imperium, though I make no promises on that front. But for now, you will remain, and we will continue this conversation when circumstances allow. Before Theron can respond, he feels his consciousness beginning to fade as the Necrons cycle his systems back down towards stasis. He tries to fight it, tries to demand more answers, tries to understand what fate awaits him. But the pull of sleep is irresistible, and his last coherent thought before darkness claims him is a question that will haunt whatever dreams machine spirits experience. Is this better or worse than being forgotten entirely? Possible outcomes: confrontation and curiosity. The discovery of a dreadnought within a Necron tomb opens numerous potential paths forward, each dependent on the specific circumstances of the encounter, the personalities of the Necrons involved, and the strategic situation facing both parties. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is vast enough to accommodate multiple variations of this scenario, and each would unfold differently based on countless variables. Yet certain patterns emerge when we consider how such an encounter might develop, paths shaped by the fundamental natures of both the Necrons and the Imperium's finest. The first, and perhaps most likely scenario, involves immediate violence. Necron dynasties vary wildly in their approach to other species, but many, particularly those still reeling from the discovery, that younger races have claimed their worlds during the long sleep, default to aggressive elimination of organic life. A dynasty following this philosophy would view a dreadnought not as a curiosity, but as an intruder, a contamination to be purged from the tomb's sacred chambers. The Overlord's command would be simple: destroy the intrusion and eliminate any evidence of the breach that allowed it to enter. In this scenario, the dreadnought would likely be awakened not for conversation, but for execution. The Necrons would power up its systems just enough to confirm the nature of what they had found, identify it as an Imperial war machine, and then methodically dismantle it. Gauss weaponry would strip the ceramite armor atom by atom, revealing the sarcophagus beneath. The Necrons might pause briefly to examine the organic components within, studying the human warrior with the same detached interest that a human scientist might examine an interesting specimen of Xenos biology. Then they would terminate the life support systems, allowing the occupant to die and dissect the remains for whatever technological insights might be gleaned. This path, brutal as it sounds, would be considered entirely appropriate by many Necron dynasties. They have no interest in preserving the lives of younger species, no moral qualms about eliminating potential threats, and a strong desire to maintain the purity of their tomb worlds. A dead human in a destroyed dreadnought represents a problem solved, a mystery answered, and a source of potentially useful data about Imperial military capabilities. That the human inside was once a living being with thoughts, feelings, and experiences would be irrelevant. The Necrons lost the capacity to truly empathize with organic life millions of years ago, and many feel nothing but contempt for the species that now infest their former territories. But not all encounters would follow this path. Some Necron nobles, particularly those who have retained more of their original personalities or developed unusual perspectives during their long existence, might stay their hand from immediate destruction. These Necrons might recognize the Dreadnought as something worth preserving, either for strategic reasons or out of a curiosity that has somehow survived the deadening effects of biotransference. A Necron overlord focused on strategic considerations might see value in keeping the Dreadnought functional as a source of intelligence. The Space Marine inside, if convinced or compelled to cooperate, could provide information about current Imperial military dispositions, the capabilities of various Space Marine chapters, recent developments in Imperial technology, and countless other details that might prove useful in planning campaigns against Imperial forces. The Necrons excel at extracting information from captured technology, and a conscious, communicative subject would be far more valuable than a silent corpse. This path would likely involve a complex game of negotiation and coercion. The Necrons would need to determine what leverage they possessed over the Dreadnought's occupant. Simply threatening death would be ineffective. Space Marines are conditioned to accept death in service of the Emperor, and threats of torture would be similarly useless, given that the Dreadnought's occupant is already in constant pain from their injuries and imprisonment. Instead, the Necrons would need to offer something the Space Marine actually desires. Perhaps the most effective leverage would be the promise of return. If the Necrons could credibly offer to return the Dreadnought to Imperial space, perhaps even to his own chapter, that might be enough to secure at least limited cooperation. The Space Marine would face an agonizing choice: maintain loyalty by refusing all cooperation, accepting that he will die or remain imprisoned forever, or provide some information in exchange for the possibility, however slim, of returning home. This scenario assumes the Space Marine believes the Necron offer is genuine, which would itself be difficult to establish. The Imperium's propaganda depicts Xenos as universally treacherous and cruel, and Space Marine indoctrination reinforces this view. Convincing a Space Marine that a Necron overlord would honor an agreement would require significant effort, possibly including demonstrations of the overlord's capabilities and intentions. A more intriguing possibility arises if the Necron dynasty in question has unusual motivations. Some Necron nobles have developed almost collector-like obsessions, Trazyn the Infinite being the most famous example, but hardly the only one. These Necrons view the galaxy as a museum of sorts, with themselves as curators, preserving examples of various species, technologies, and historical moments. A Necron of this temperament might see the Dreadnought not as a threat or a source of intelligence, but as a prize, a unique example of Imperial military technology and culture worthy of preservation. Trazyn himself would almost certainly seek to add the Dreadnought to his galleries on Solemn Nace if he became aware of its existence. He has collected far more common things, and a Dreadnought occupied by a space marine who has served for centuries would represent a wonderful addition to his exhibits on Imperial military capabilities. He might even attempt to recreate the circumstances that led to the Dreadnought ending up in a Necron tomb, building a diorama that captured the strangeness of the situation for whatever future beings might one day tour his galleries. For the Dreadnought's occupant, being acquired by a collector like Trazyn might represent the strangest possible fate. He would be preserved, maintained in perfect condition, perhaps even periodically awakened so Trazyn could converse with him about Imperial history and military matters. But he would never fight again, never serve his chapter again, never fulfill the purpose for which he endured centuries of imprisonment. He would become a living museum piece, a curiosity for a Xenos collector, spending eternity in stasis when not being displayed. Whether this would be better or worse than simple destruction would depend entirely on the individual Space Marine's perspective. Another path, perhaps the most unexpected of all, involves cooperation, born not of coercion, but of mutual recognition. This requires a Necron noble with sufficient retained personality to experience something like empathy, and a Space Marine willing to see past his indoctrination enough to recognize a kindred spirit. The conversation between Lord Thazar and Brother Ancient Theron, imagined earlier, represents the beginning of such a path. If both parties could move past their initial hostility and mutual suspicion, they might discover that they have more in common than either would care to admit. Both are beings trapped in mechanical bodies, denied the natural end that should have claimed them, awakened only when needed, and returned to dreamless sleep between deployments. Both serve organizations that claim to honor them while essentially using them as tools. Both carry memories of better times, before transformation, before the curse of mechanical immortality, memories that grow increasingly hazy and unreliable with each passing century. This recognition would not make them allies in any conventional sense. The Necron would still see the Imperium as upstart organics who must be subjugated or destroyed. The Space Marine would still view the Necrons as Xenos abominations to be purged. Their fundamental allegiances and purposes remain in opposition. But beneath that opposition might exist a strange form of respect, an acknowledgement that they both bear similar burdens even if they serve different masters. Such a situation might lead to a peculiar form of coexistence. The Necron dynasty might choose to maintain the Dreadnought in functional condition but inactive, preserving him in stasis like their own warriors between battles. Periodically, perhaps when circumstances warrant, or when the Overlord desires conversation with a being who truly understands the curse of mechanical existence, they might awaken him for brief exchanges. The Space Marine, for his part, might provide limited information or insights in exchange for these moments of consciousness, and the possibility, however distant, of eventual return to Imperial space. This path would require both parties to violate their normal protocols and conditioning. The Necron would need to resist the programmed impulse to destroy all organic intrusions. The Space Marine would need to move past his indoctrination that forbids any cooperation with Xenos. Both would need to recognize that sometimes survival and sanity require compromises that doctrine does not permit. Yet another possibility exists in dynasties that have dedicated themselves to reversing biotransference. These Necrons, recognizing the curse that was inflicted upon their species, seek ways to reclaim organic bodies and the capacity for true life. A Dreadnought, with its combination of organic components kept alive by mechanical systems, might represent a valuable subject for study. The Necrons might see in the Space Marines' preservation a model for their own research, clues about how to maintain organic life within mechanical frameworks that could inform their attempts to reverse their transformation. In this scenario, the Dreadnought's occupant might find himself in the uncomfortable position of being an experimental subject. The Necrons would keep him alive, maintaining his systems with meticulous care, but they would also study him intensively. They would analyze how his organic brain interfaces with the Dreadnought's mechanical systems, how the life support maintains his damaged body, how consciousness persists in such a limited organic package. They might even attempt to improve his condition, not out of compassion, but to better understand the principles involved. For a Space Marine who has endured centuries of pain and deterioration within his Dreadnought sarcophagus, the attention of Necron scientists might bring unexpected benefits. If the Necrons could actually improve his condition, reduce his pain, repair damage that Imperial technology could not, that would be a genuine relief, even if it came from Xenos sources. But it would also create a terrible moral dilemma. Could he accept aid from Xenos, from the very beings his chapter has sworn to destroy? Would improvement of his condition compromise his loyalty to the Emperor? These are questions that would have no easy answers. The final major scenario to consider involves the possibility of the Dreadnought becoming, however improbably, an asset in Necron operations. Some Necron dynasties employ various constructs and lesser beings in their military forces. The Canoptech constructs serve as maintenance and combat units. Some dynasties have been known to use other species' technology when it proves useful. A functional Imperial Dreadnought, if it could be controlled or convinced to cooperate, would represent a significant tactical asset. The challenge would be ensuring the Dreadnought's cooperation or compliance. The Necrons could attempt to hack into the Dreadnought's control systems, overriding the pilot's ability to resist and turning him into an unwilling puppet. This would be technologically challenging, as the connection between the Space Marine's mind and the Dreadnought's systems is organic and neural rather than purely mechanical. But Necron cryptechs have accomplished stranger feats. The result would be tragic. A Space Marine forced to fight against his own kind, fully conscious, but unable to resist the Necron commands that override his will. Alternatively, circumstances might arise where the Space Marine chooses cooperation, however temporary. If the Tomb World faces an existential threat that affects both the Necrons and the imprisoned Dreadnought, they might find common cause. Perhaps a Tyranid hive fleet discovers the planet and begins consuming everything, organic and mechanical alike. Perhaps chaos forces breach the tomb, seeking to corrupt or destroy both the Necrons and the Space Marine. In such scenarios, the Space Marine might accept that fighting alongside the Necrons is preferable to being destroyed or corrupted, an alliance of necessity born from mutual threat. This would represent perhaps the strangest possible outcome, a Space Marine Dreadnought fighting beside Necron warriors against a common enemy. The Space Marine would hate every moment, despise the necessity that forces him to cooperate with Xenos, but might accept it as preferable to the alternatives. The Necrons, for their part, might find the arrangement pragmatically useful, while viewing it as temporary and ultimately meaningless beyond immediate tactical considerations. Regardless of which path the encounter follows, certain truths remain constant. The meeting of a Necron tomb and an imprisoned Space Marine represents a collision of two different flavors of immortality as curse. Both exist in states that should not be possible. Consciousness preserved beyond all natural boundaries through technological means. Both serve organizations that use them as tools while claiming to honor them. Both carry the weight of centuries or millennia of existence, watching the galaxy change around them while they remain eternally locked in their purposes. The specific outcome of any such encounter would depend on countless variables, from the personalities involved to the strategic situations facing both parties. But all possible paths share the same underlying horror. Two beings, trapped in metal shells, encountering each other in the depths of a tomb, each recognizing in the other a distorted reflection of their own cursed existence. There is no possibility of a happy ending to such an encounter, only different varieties of tragedy, different shades of the same fundamental darkness. The philosophical mirror, two forms of immortality. To understand why the encounter between Necrons and a Dreadnought carries such philosophical weight, we must examine what these two forms of existence reveal about the nature of consciousness, identity, and the prices paid for survival beyond natural limits. Both the Necrons and Space Marine Dreadnoughts represent humanity's and the Necrontiers' attempts to overcome mortality, to extend service and consciousness beyond the failure of biological bodies. But in both cases, the cure has proven worse than the disease, creating existences that are perhaps more horrifying than simple death would have been. The Necrons chose their transformation, or at least their leaders chose for them. 60 million years ago, the Necrontyre faced extinction at the hands of the Old Ones, and biotransference seemed like the only possible salvation. They were promised immortality, freedom from the cancers and short lifespans that plagued their species, and the power to finally defeat their enemies. What they received was technically what they were promised, but the fine print of the contract contained horrors they never imagined. The transformation stripped away something essential from most Necrons. The lowest ranks lost virtually all personality and self-awareness, reduced to programmable automatons that could think only in terms of following orders and executing tactical protocols. Even the nobles who retained more of their cognitive functions found themselves profoundly diminished. The capacity for joy, for true creativity, for deep emotional connection. These were consumed by the Citan, along with the Necrons' souls. What remained was consciousness without the fullness of life, awareness without the capacity to truly experience existence. After millions of years, the degradation has only intensified. The long sleep damaged many Necrons' personality matrices beyond repair. The repeated cycles of awakening and stasis have worn away at what remained of their original personalities. The sheer weight of millions of years of existence has ground down the complexity of their consciousness, leaving only the hardest, most fundamental aspects behind. Many Necrons now operate more as highly sophisticated machines than as conscious beings in any meaningful sense. They remember being alive, perhaps, but the memory is distant and abstract, like trying to recall a dream from childhood. Yet some Necrons have retained enough personality to recognize the horror of their existence. These rare individuals, usually among the highest nobility, still possess sufficient cognitive complexity to contemplate their situation and find it wanting. They exist in a peculiar hell of their own, aware enough to understand what they have lost, but incapable of truly feeling the grief that knowledge should bring. They can conceptually recognize that biotransference was a terrible mistake, but they cannot emotionally process that recognition in the way organic beings could. They are trapped in a strange twilight, where they know they should feel but cannot, understand what emotion once was, but can only simulate its echoes. The Space Marine in his Dreadnought sarcophagus exists in a different but parallel form of imprisonment. Where the Necrons surrendered their flesh entirely, the Space Marine retains fragments of his organic body, but those fragments are so damaged and dependent on life support that they might as well be gone. Where the Necrons were transformed as an entire species. The Space Marine's transformation was individual, a fate reserved for those deemed too valuable to allow death. But the result, in both cases, is consciousness trapped in a metal shell, unable to escape, and slowly deteriorating over time. The Space Marine's transformation was not chosen in any meaningful sense. When a warrior is broken beyond repair in battle, barely clinging to life, the choice of Dreadnought interment is presented as an honor. But what choice does a dying warrior really have? Accept interment and continue serving the Emperor, or refuse and die? Framed this way, it barely qualifies as a choice at all. The Space Marine's indoctrination, his conditioning, his entire purpose as a weapon of the Imperium, all of these factors compel him toward acceptance, even if some part of him might wish for the peace of death. Once sealed in the sarcophagus, the Space Marine discovers the true price of his continued service. He exists in a state of constant low-level torment. The amniotic fluid that keeps him alive feels alien and wrong. The neural interfaces that connect him to the Dreadnought carry constant static and feedback. The awareness of his shattered body, even filtered through the machine systems, remains present. He can never scratch an itch, never shift position, never experience the simple comforts that make physical existence bearable. He is trapped utterly and completely, sealed in a coffin that happens to be mobile, but is no less a tomb for that mobility. The psychological effects compound over time. The isolation between battles, the long periods of stasis sleep, the repeated awakenings to find that years or decades have passed. All of these wear away at the Space Marine's sense of self. His memories become less reliable. The faces of battle brothers he once knew blur together. The details of his life before interment fade into vague impressions. He remembers being flesh and blood, but the memory becomes increasingly abstract, like recalling a story told by someone else rather than a direct experience. Both the Necrons and the Dreadnought occupant face the same fundamental problem. They have been granted a form of immortality that slowly erases the self that was supposed to be preserved. The Necrons lost their souls to the Satan, and then lost more and more of their personalities to the passage of eons. The Space Marine loses pieces of himself with each cycle of stasis and awakening, the organic portions of his brain deteriorating despite the best efforts of the life support systems. In both cases, the entity that continues to exist becomes less and less the being that originally chose or accepted this fate. The existential horror of both situations lies not in the transformation itself, but in the awareness that accompanies it. The Necrons, who retain enough personality to contemplate their existence, can recognize what they have become and what they have lost. The Space Marine, between battles, has nothing to do but experience the reality of his imprisonment and contemplate how much longer he can continue before there is nothing left of the warrior he once was. Both are slowly dying by degrees, but the process takes centuries or millennia instead of the minutes or hours that would characterize normal death. Yet there are differences between the two forms of mechanical immortality that make their parallel all the more striking. The Necrons are more thoroughly transformed than any Dreadnought occupant could be. They have completely abandoned organic form, existing as pure consciousness encoded in mechanical substrates. The Space Marine retains his organic brain. His organic form, however damaged, creates a connection to his former existence that the Necrons lack. He still breathes, in his fashion, still possesses flesh that can feel pain, still operates through biological neural pathways augmented by, but not replaced, by machine interfaces. This difference makes the Space Marine's suffering more immediate and visceral in some ways. He experiences physical sensations, even if those sensations are filtered through layers of technological mediation. The Necrons are past physical sensation, operating purely through artificial sensory inputs that bear only abstract relationships to organic experience. The Space Marine still possesses something to lose, fragments of humanity that deteriorate but have not been entirely eradicated. The Necrons have already lost what the Space Marine fears losing, which makes their existence perhaps more completely tragic, but also more thoroughly numbed to that tragedy. The purpose that both claim to serve provides another point of comparison. The Necrons serve their dynasties, following protocols and priorities that were encoded into their consciousness millions of years ago. Many no longer remember why they serve these purposes, only that they must. The behavioral imperatives remain even after the reasoning behind them has been lost to time and degradation. They conquer because conquest is what they are programmed to do. They eliminate organic life because their directives require it. They seek to restore their empire because the command to do so is hardwired into their very consciousness. The Space Marine serves the Emperor and his chapter, driven by indoctrination and purpose that was instilled during his creation and training. Unlike the Necrons, he more clearly understands why he serves. He fights to protect humanity, to serve the Emperor's vision, to uphold his chapter's honor. His purpose is conscious and deliberate rather than simply programmed. But as the centuries pass and his memories fade, does the distinction truly matter? When a Dreadnought has served for 1,000 years, when all the battle brothers he trained with are dead, when even the faces of his Primarch or chapter master have become hazy legends rather than clear memories, does he serve out of genuine understanding, or merely because serving is all he knows how to do? Both the Necrons and the Dreadnought occupant exist in service to organizations that view them as tools, even while claiming to honor them. The Necron nobles speak of duty and dynasty, framing their endless campaigns as restoration of rightful order. But the reality is that the lower-ranked Necrons are simply weapons pointed at whatever target the nobles select. The Imperium venerates its Dreadnoughts, treating them as living ancestors and honored heroes. But the reality is that they are awakened when the chapter needs heavy firepower and return to stasis when that need passes. The rhetoric of honor masks the underlying utilitarian reality in both cases. The awareness of this utilitarian reality, when it penetrates the defenses of doctrine and conditioning, creates a particular flavor of despair. To be simultaneously honored and used, revered and deployed, respected and ultimately disposable, this creates a cognitive dissonance that is difficult to resolve. Both Necrons and Space Marines are trained or programmed to accept their roles, to find meaning in service, to see their sacrifice as worthwhile. But when the service extends across centuries or millennia, when the entity doing the serving is no longer quite the same being that accepted the role, the questions become harder to avoid. What makes the mirror between Necrons and Dreadnoughts so philosophically significant is that it reveals a universal truth about the dangers of extreme life extension through mechanical means. Both represent attempts to cheat death by transferring consciousness into more durable forms. Both have technically succeeded in that narrow goal. Necrons and Dreadnought occupants do continue to exist far beyond their natural lifespans. But both have also revealed that simply maintaining consciousness is not enough to make existence meaningful or bearable. The tragedy is not that they continue to exist. The tragedy is that they continue to exist in a state that makes existence itself a burden. They have achieved immortality, but discovered that immortality without the capacity to truly live, to grow, to change, to feel the full spectrum of experience, is perhaps worse than mortal death would have been. They are proof that consciousness alone is not sufficient for meaningful existence, that identity requires more than just awareness to remain intact across vast stretches of time. When a Necron encounters a Dreadnought, when Lord Thassa looks at Brother Ancient Theron and sees his own cursed existence reflected back at him, the recognition that passes between them is not just that they are similar. It is that they are both victims of the same fundamental error, the belief that extending consciousness through technological means would preserve what made them who they were. They have learned, at terrible cost, that consciousness and identity are not the same thing, that you can maintain the former while slowly losing the latter, until what remains is a shell that remembers being a person, but can no longer truly claim that status. This is the philosophical horror at the heart of both the Necrons and the Dreadnoughts. Not that they are machines. Many beings in the Warhammer 40,000 universe integrate seamlessly with technology without losing their essential nature. The horror is that they are consciousnesses trapped in machines that slowly grind away everything that made their consciousness worth preserving. They are prisons of metal and ceramic that hold minds slowly eroding under the weight of time and transformation. They are warnings written in living metal and ceramite, about the prices paid when survival is valued above all else. Dynasty responses, a galaxy of perspectives. The Necron species, despite its apparent uniformity when viewed from the outside, encompasses vast diversity in outlook, priority, and personality among its nobility. The dynasties that govern the tomb worlds scattered across the galaxy differ as much from each other as human civilizations differ, shaped by their unique histories, the personalities of their rulers, and the specific circumstances of their awakening. How any particular dynasty would respond to discovering a dreadnought within their tomb depends critically on which dynasty we are discussing and what priorities drive their leadership. The Sarikhan dynasty, ruled by the Silent King himself after his return to the galaxy, represents perhaps the most complex case. Sarek, alone among the Necron nobility, understands the full horror of what biotransference cost his species. He was the one who made the bargain with the Satan, who ordered his entire species to undergo transformation, and who then watched as they lost their souls to feed the star gods. He carries guilt, or the mechanical approximation of guilt that his programming allows, for this decision. He has spent millions of years in self-imposed exile, attempting to find some form of redemption or at least understanding for what he has done. If the Sarikhan dynasty discovered a dreadnought, Zarek himself would likely take personal interest in it. He would see in the Space Marine another being trapped by the decisions of their leaders, transformed into something other than what they were born to be for the sake of their civilization's survival. He would recognize the parallel immediately and would likely spare the dreadnought from immediate destruction, if only to study this other form of mechanical imprisonment. But Zarek is also pragmatic, shaped by millions of years of strategic thinking. Any mercy or consideration he might show would be tempered by the larger strategic priorities of restoring the Necron Empire and preparing for the threat of the Tyranids, which he sees as an existential danger to all life in the galaxy. The Sautek dynasty, ruled by the ambitious and aggressive Imhotep the Stormlord, would likely take a more hostile but still calculating approach. Imhotep is a military genius of the highest order, a strategic thinker who has expanded his dynasty's territory dramatically since his awakening. He views war as a science and seeks to understand every aspect of his enemy's capabilities. A dreadnought would be seen as a valuable source of intelligence about Imperial military doctrine and Space Marine capabilities. Imhotep would likely order the dreadnought preserved for detailed study, its systems analyzed, its occupant interrogated if possible, but the preservation would be clinical and dispassionate, motivated purely by the tactical advantage such knowledge would provide. Once every useful scrap of information had been extracted, Imhotep would see no reason to maintain the dreadnought further. The Mefrit dynasty, known for their mastery of solar energy weapons and their history as executioners of worlds during the Necron Empire's height, would likely respond with characteristic ruthlessness. This dynasty is among the most aggressive and unforgiving of the Necron factions, seeing little value in the continued existence of organic life forms. They would view a dreadnought as an intrusion to be eliminated, a stain on the purity of their tomb to be purged. The execution would likely be swift and final, the dreadnought's systems overloaded by the same solar energy weapons the dynasty uses to burn through enemy armor. Any thought of preservation or study would be dismissed as unnecessary sentimentality. The Nefrek dynasty presents an interesting counterpoint. This dynasty has made the reversal of biotransference their primary goal, seeking ways to reclaim organic bodies and escape the prison of living metal. They have experimented extensively with technologies that blur the line between flesh and machine, seeking the secrets that would allow them to restore what the Satan took from them. A dreadnought would be extraordinarily valuable to the Nefrek, as it represents exactly the kind of hybrid existence they seek to understand. Here is an organic consciousness sustained within a mechanical frame, using technology to bridge the gap between flesh and metal. The Nefrek would likely preserve the dreadnought with great care, possibly even attempting to improve the Space Marine's condition to better study the principles involved. Their cryptex would analyze every aspect of how the human brain interfaces with the Dreadnought systems, how the life support maintains organic tissue, how consciousness persists in such a limited organic substrate. They might even attempt to communicate with the Space Marine, offering improved conditions in exchange for cooperation in their research. Of all the major dynasties, the Nephrek might be most likely to eventually release the Dreadnought if they concluded they had learned everything they could from him, though such release would depend entirely on whether they felt the risks of doing so outweighed the potential benefits. The Novok dynasty, warriors who embrace close combat and take pride in personal martial prowess, might respond to a Dreadnought with something approaching respect. This dynasty values strength and martial skill above most other considerations. They wage war not merely to conquer, but to test themselves against worthy opponents and prove their superiority through combat. A Space Marine who has served in battle for centuries, sealed in a weapons platform specifically designed for combat, might be seen as a potential worthy adversary. The Novok might awaken the Dreadnought and offer him a chance to fight, not to the death necessarily, but in controlled combat that would allow the dynasty's warriors to test their skills against Imperial technology and a veteran Space Marine's tactical acumen. If the Dreadnought fought well, showing the kind of martial prowess the Novok respect, they might even preserve him for future such engagements. This would create a bizarre situation where the Space Marine becomes a kind of gladiatorial exhibit, periodically awakened to fight against Necron champions in contests that serve no strategic purpose beyond satisfying the dynasty's obsession with combat. Trazyn the Infinite, though his holdings on Solemnace represent more a personal collection than a full dynasty, deserves special mention. If Trazyn learned of a Dreadnought within another dynasty's tomb, he would move heaven and earth to acquire it for his galleries. His vast collection includes examples of military technology from across the galaxy's history, and a functional Dreadnought occupied by a Space Marine with centuries of service would be an exceptional prize. Trazyn has been known to engage in complex trades, negotiations, and even outright theft to acquire items he desires for his collection. If Trazyn successfully acquired the Dreadnought, the Space Marine inside would face perhaps the strangest fate possible. He would be preserved in perfect condition, maintained with technology far superior to anything the Imperium possesses. He would likely be periodically awakened so Trazyn could converse with him, the ancient collector delighting in discussions with historical figures and interesting specimens. But the Space Marine would never fight again, never serve his chapter again, never fulfill the purpose that gave his cursed existence meaning. He would become a living exhibit, a curiosity in the galaxy's most comprehensive collection, spending eternity as a testament to Imperial military prowess, but never allowed to demonstrate that prowess in actual combat. Smaller or less well-known dynasties would respond according to their own unique circumstances and philosophies. Some, having awakened to find their tomb worlds badly damaged or their populations severely depleted, might see even a single Dreadnought as a threat too dangerous to allow to persist. Others, secure in their power and curious about the changes in the galaxy during their absence, might view the Dreadnought as a valuable source of information about the current state of the Imperium and the younger races. Destroyer cult members, Necrons who have embraced their machine nature completely and developed an apocalyptic hatred for all organic life, would show no mercy whatsoever. These beings, often considered mad even by other Necrons, see all organic existence as an abomination to be eradicated. A Dreadnought, with its organic components and human consciousness, would be targeted for immediate and complete annihilation. The Destroyer cult's weapons would not simply destroy the Dreadnought, but would attempt to erase every trace of organic matter, burning away the human component until nothing remained but ash and the memory of existence. The response of flayed ones, Necrons afflicted with a strange form of madness that makes them obsessed with flesh and skinning their victims, would be equally horrific, but in a different way. These beings, possibly cursed by the death scream of the Sertan Landugor, might be drawn to the organic components within the Dreadnought sarcophagus. They would attempt to breach the armor, seeking the flesh within, driven by compulsions they do not understand and cannot resist. The result would be nightmarish. The flayed ones tearing at the Dreadnought, while the Space Marine inside watches helplessly, unable to defend himself, until either rescue comes or the flayed ones succeed in their grisly purpose. The diversity of possible responses reflects the fundamental truth about the Necrons. They are not a monolithic empire, but a collection of competing dynasties, each with its own priorities, each shaped by the personalities of its nobles and the circumstances of its awakening. Some would see the Dreadnought as a threat, others as a curiosity, still others as a resource or a prize. Some would respond with immediate violence, others with calculated study, a few with something that might almost be called empathy or understanding. But in almost all cases, the Dreadnought's fate would be decided by strategic considerations rather than moral ones. The Necrons have lost much of their capacity for moral reasoning in the way organic species understand it. Their decisions are driven by protocol, by programming, by the strategic calculus of advantage and disadvantage. The life of the Space Marine inside the Dreadnought would be valued or dismissed, not based on any inherent worth, but on what utility he might provide or what threat he might represent. This utilitarian approach to the Dreadnought's fate creates its own form of horror. The Space Marine inside, conditioned to value honor, duty, and sacrifice, would find himself being weighed on scales that have no consideration for such concepts. His centuries of service, his dedication to the Emperor, his willingness to endure endless imprisonment for the sake of his chapter, all of these would be irrelevant to beings who view existence through purely mechanical and strategic lenses. He would learn that from the Necron perspective, he is not a hero, or a warrior, or even a person. He is simply an object, interesting or threatening, or valuable or worthless, depending on circumstances that have nothing to do with who he is or what he has accomplished. The broader implications. The scenario of Necrons discovering a Dreadnought within their tomb resonates beyond its immediate narrative elements to illuminate deeper themes about existence, consciousness, and the nature of service in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These themes, while embodied most clearly in the encounter between these two specific forms of mechanical immortality, speak to larger questions that define much of the setting's philosophical framework. At its core, the encounter reveals the fundamental horror that underlies much of the Warhammer 40,000 setting: the transformation of conscious beings into tools, the reduction of persons to functions, the gradual erosion of everything that makes existence meaningful in service of abstract goals that may themselves be questionable. Both the Necrons and the Dreadnought occupant have been sacrificed on the altar of necessity, their original forms and identities subsumed into mechanical constructs that serve purposes larger than themselves. This theme of sacrifice extended beyond all reasonable boundaries appears throughout the Imperium. The Emperor himself exists in perhaps the ultimate form of mechanical imprisonment, sealed within the Golden Throne, sustained by thousands of psycho-sacrifices daily, conscious but unable to act directly, watching his Imperium stumble through 10,000 years of darkness, while he can do nothing but provide the astronomical light that guides human ships through the warp. If we view the Emperor's situation as the apex of the pyramid, the Dreadnoughts represent a lower, but still elevated tier of the same fundamental pattern. Beings preserved past their natural end because their utility to the larger organization is deemed to outweigh their right to die. The Necrons represent this same pattern taken to its logical extreme and played out across an entire species. Every Necron, from the Silent King to the lowliest warrior, is a being that has been transformed into something other than what it was born to be for the sake of survival. The difference is one of scale and time rather than kind. Where the Dreadnought represents an individual tragedy repeated across thousands of cases, the Necrons represent a civilizational tragedy that consumed billions. The mirror between these two forms of existence raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of duty and service. When does devotion to a cause become self-destruction? At what point does the preservation of consciousness cease to be meaningful, if the consciousness being preserved has been so altered that it barely resembles its original form? How much of the self can be sacrificed before service becomes meaningless because there is no longer a self doing the serving? These questions have no easy answers, which is precisely what makes them powerful. The Warhammer 40,000 setting deliberately refuses to provide comfortable resolutions to such dilemmas. Instead, it presents scenario after scenario where characters must choose between bad options, where survival requires sacrifices that fundamentally compromise what is being preserved, where the price of victory is often indistinguishable from the cost of defeat. The existence of both Necrons and Dreadnoughts suggests that the Imperium and the ancient Necrontyr made the same fundamental error. They assumed that consciousness and identity are the same thing, that preserving awareness automatically preserves the person. Both discovered, at terrible cost, that this assumption was false. Consciousness can persist long after identity has eroded away, leaving behind entities that remember being people but can no longer truly claim that status. This realization carries implications for how we understand other aspects of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The Adeptus Mechanicus, with their extensive augmentations and gradual replacement of flesh with machine, face similar questions about how much humanity can be preserved when the substrate of human existence is progressively replaced. Servitors, lobotomized humans converted into biological robots, represent the endpoint of this process carried to its most extreme and horrific conclusion. The Space Marines themselves, even before any consideration of Dreadnought interment, exist as beings transformed so far from baseline humanity that questions about their remaining humanity become relevant. The Necron's existence also illuminates the dangers of any civilization that seeks to transcend its biological limitations through technological means. They serve as a cautionary tale about unintended consequences and Faustian bargains. They accepted biotransference, believing it would solve their problems, grant them the power to defeat their enemies, and free them from the curse of mortality. They received exactly what they were promised in the most literal sense, while losing everything that made the promise valuable. Their tragedy warns against solutions that address symptoms while ignoring root causes, that grant survival without meaning, that preserve existence while destroying the capacity to appreciate that existence. From a narrative perspective, the encounter between Necrons and a Dreadnought serves another purpose. It humanizes both parties in ways that pure combat encounters cannot. When we see Necrons only as enemies to be destroyed on the battlefield, it is easy to forget that they were once a living species with hopes, dreams, and aspirations. When we see Dreadnoughts only as powerful weapons platforms that enhance chapter combat capabilities, it is easy to forget the individuals sealed within them and the costs they pay for their continued service. By bringing these two entities together in a context where violence is not the immediate or only option, the scenario forces us to confront the consciousness that resides within the mechanical shells. We must acknowledge that Lord Thassar, despite his mechanical body and his millions of years of existence, still possesses something that might be called thought or awareness. We must recognize that Brother Ancient Theron, despite being reduced to little more than a brain in a jar, still maintains his identity and his sense of purpose. The encounter becomes not merely a meeting of enemies, but a confrontation between two different expressions of the same fundamental tragedy. This recognition does not resolve the enmity between the Imperium and the Necrons. They remain opposed at every level, their goals and methods fundamentally incompatible. But it adds depth to that opposition, suggesting that even implacable enemies can recognize aspects of themselves in each other, can acknowledge shared experiences of suffering and loss even while remaining committed to mutual destruction. The scenario also speaks to the nature of horror in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The most effective horror in this universe comes not from the monstrous or the alien, but from the implications of humanity's own choices and institutions. The demons of chaos are terrible, but they are supernatural threats from another dimension. The Tyranids are horrifying, but they are an external menace from beyond the galaxy. The true horror emerges from looking at what humanity and other species do to themselves and each other in the name of survival. The Dreadnought represents the Imperium's willingness to preserve its warriors in states of constant suffering because their continued service is deemed valuable enough to outweigh their right to peace. And the Necrons represent a species that chose survival over meaning and discovered too late that survival without meaning is its own form of death. Both are horrors born not from external threat, but from internal decisions, from choices made by leaders who believed they were doing what was necessary for survival. This inward-facing horror is far more unsettling than any external threat, because it implicates us as participants in the system that creates such outcomes. We cannot simply blame the Tyranids or chaos for the suffering of Dreadnoughts or Necrons. That suffering emerges directly from the decisions and structures of their own civilizations. It forces us to ask whether the Imperium's treatment of its heroes is truly honorable, or whether it represents a particularly insidious form of cruelty. It makes us question whether the Necrons ever had a chance to avoid their fate, or whether the circumstances of their existence made biotransference inevitable. The encounter between Necrons and a Dreadnought also highlights the arbitrary nature of fate in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. By what strange confluence of circumstances does a Space Marine Dreadnought end up in a Necron tomb? What chain of cause and effect? What series of unlikely events? What random factors had to align for such an improbable situation to occur? The scenario reminds us that in a galaxy of trillions of beings and countless worlds, even the most unlikely events will sometimes happen. And when they do, they can create situations that force us to confront truths we might prefer to ignore. If the Dreadnought had ended up anywhere else, if he had been recovered by Imperial forces, or destroyed in whatever battle led to his presence in the tomb, he would remain simply one more example of Dreadnought service, remarkable only for his centuries of dedication and the mystery of his final fate. But by ending up in a Necron tomb, by being discovered by beings who exist in a parallel state of mechanical imprisonment, his existence becomes a mirror that reflects uncomfortable truths about both the Imperium and the Necrons. Conclusion. In the depths of a Necron tomb, surrounded by the slumbering forms of millions of ancient warriors, a Space Marine Dreadnought rests in his own mechanical sleep. He does not know how he came to be here. Perhaps he will never know. The battle that led to his presence in this place is lost to time or damage, or the simple gaps in his deteriorating memory. All that matters now is that he is here, an impossibility made real, a human warrior preserved beyond death sleeping in a vault built by Xenos, who underwent their own terrible transformation. When the tomb awakens, when ancient systems stir to life and Necron nobles emerge from stasis to reclaim their heritage, they will discover him. They will find this curiosity, this artifact of a younger species' attempt to cheat death, and they will have to decide what to do with it. The decision they make will depend on countless factors, from the personality of the nobles to the strategic situation facing the dynasty to simple chance and circumstance. But whatever they decide, whether they destroy him or preserve him, study him or ignore him, the encounter will be significant. Because in that moment of discovery, when mechanical beings look upon another mechanical being and recognize something familiar, something will pass between them. Not understanding perhaps, and certainly not friendship, but a recognition, however fleeting, that they share a terrible bond. They are both ghosts in shells of metal, both consciousnesses trapped beyond their natural span, both examples of what happens when survival is valued above all else. The Space Marine will likely never return to his chapter. His brothers, If any still live who remember him, have long since mourned his loss and moved on. His service, his dedication, his willingness to endure centuries of imprisonment, all of it has brought him to this strange end, sleeping in a tomb built by ancient enemies, waiting for a fate he cannot control or predict. Whether this is more or less tragic than the death he avoided on some forgotten battlefield is a question that has no clear answer. The Necrons will continue their awakening, their campaign to reclaim the galaxy they once ruled, their endless struggle against the weight of their own existence. The discovery of a dreadnought within their tomb will be noted, catalogued, filed away among the countless other strange occurrences that mark their return to active operations. In time, it will likely be forgotten, lost in the vast archive of data that accumulates over millions of years of existence. Unless, of course, it leads to something more, some consequence or implication that keeps it relevant. But for one brief moment, when Necron and Dreadnought regard each other, when Lord Thassar looks at brother Ancient Theron and sees his own reflection in that metal shell, something profound will occur. Two beings will acknowledge, however reluctantly, that the curse of mechanical immortality knows no boundaries of species or allegiance, that the horror of consciousness imprisoned is universal, affecting Necron and human alike, Xenos and Space Marine equally. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But sometimes, in the spaces between battles, in the quiet moments before violence resumes, there are also these strange encounters. These meetings that reveal truths about existence that no amount of combat can teach. These moments when even the most implacable enemies recognize something of themselves in each other, even if that recognition changes nothing and leads nowhere. The Dreadnought sleeps in the Necron tomb. The tomb awakens around him. And whatever comes next, it will be another chapter in the endless tragedy that defines existence in this dark millennium. Another variation on the theme of consciousness preserved at terrible cost. Another example of the price paid when survival becomes an end unto itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the philosophical and narrative implications of when Necrons discover a dreadnought in their tomb, please like this video and subscribe to Stories of Hammer for more explorations of the darker corners of Warhammer 40,000 lore. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on what might happen in such an encounter, or suggest other scenarios where the grim darkness of the far future reveals its most profound horrors. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the darkness between stars, even the unlikeliest meetings can illuminate the deepest truths about existence, duty, and the prices we pay for immortality.